All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Wen Tan, and I am teaching staff, faculty member at DILA, and I teach at the Department of Buddhist Studies. I also serve as the head of the department. On behalf of DILA, we would like to welcome you all, and especially George Northoff, who will be our first session speaker, and who will speak on a very long topic: spatial-temporal neuroscience of self and consciousness and its implications for psychiatry and psychotherapy. So the purpose of this having this workshop on campus at DILA, I think it's this is the first time, and it's very meaningful. As you know, mind or consciousness is very important, and it's the essential topic in Buddhist studies, not only in the text but also in practice, especially related to meditation, which aim is to cultivate our wisdom through training our consciousness or mind. So the purpose for this workshop to be held on the campus is to foster a cross-disciplinary dialogue between brain science and philosophy, as well as Buddhist studies. And so we welcome you all, and hoping that we will have a constructive dialogue between the different disciplines and different areas of studies. And our first speaker, Professor George Northoff, is a world-leading scholar on brain science as well as philosophy of mind. And we have another scholar, distinct scholar, Professor Zheng Kaiyuan, who will help us to summarize Professor Northoff's talk. And then after that, we will open question to everyone, and we will have hopefully an interesting and engaging dialogue. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor George Northoff to give his lecture. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and also thank you for the already wonderful time we spent here. Very impressive for me, coming from Europe, from a more Christian tradition, seeing your traditions here. So thank you very much. You had a very nice prelude, that you say you have a link between philosophy, Buddhist studies, and neuroscience. And I think that is indeed the triangle within which I move and within which I operate. And I make it even stronger. And I hope I can make the point that you need to combine all three in order really to understand, for instance, proper. Yeah. Okay. You're faster than me. Okay, thank you. So that you really need to link them in order to better understand even the brain and mind and the effect of meditation. So, you wanted me to talk mainly about psychoanalysis and psychology and consciousness, neuroscience. I will do that. So I leave out some of the philosophical implications. So the main question, which really drives me, is how is it possible that something like what we observe as neuronal activity transforms into an experience? While you see me, you may say, oh God, this guy is so boring, and oh God, I'm not interested in listening to him. So you have a certain feeling. And how is that? And I'm sure at the same time you have certain activity changes in your brain. But how is that linked? How is that transformed into an experience? That's the key question. And despite all progress, particular Western science hasn't tackled that issue. Neither in philosophy nor in neuroscience. That's what is called the mind-body problem. So, and usually, what we're dealing, particularly in the Western tradition, this is the spot here. Okay, okay, that was not good. I do this one. We're usually dealing with the upper layers. You see the iceberg. I always like the metaphor of the iceberg. But I know who's the original. So we really operate at the surface. Up there, the upper part of the iceberg. But you all know that the iceberg has a deeper layer beneath the water, which is key for how stable the upper part of the iceberg is. Now, you will see I often invoke this deeper layer in different layers. And just to preempt a little bit, I think that these kind of deeper layers of brain, mind, world, closer, okay? That these deeper layers of brain, mind, world are not that far from the kind of layers you experience in your different meditation stages. So there's already a convergence. I just preempt that. So now I was too far away here. So my talk will have 3 parts, and then I let Kai translate after that. So first I will show you a little bit the model. The model of mind-brain, which is prevalent in the Western tradition, and where I say it's insufficient, it needs to change. So that's basically the background assumptions. Then I was asked to present some data on psychoanalysis because we do a lot of research on neuropsychoanalysis. So I will present you some data and background there too. And in the third part of my talk, I exemplify what I call spatial temporal view, space-time as key dimensions of experience of the brain and, even more important, of the world. I will exemplify such view on meditation, presenting some neuroscience data with huge implications for experience, and maybe even to later in the future improve your meditation experience through neuroscience.
好，这个已经讲这么多，所以很考验我的长期记忆。那我的功能就是把他刚讲的呢，用我的方式稍微再用中文总结一下，这样，所以我会自由发挥，这样。
See, I think I need to learn Chinese, yeah.
Too late.
I know.
I already told so many jokes about you. 那所以他昨天来就已经被法鼓山的整个这个场景就是被证婚这样所以他很快找到大殿的中线，然后在这边就是说可以在这边待很久那所以来这边就是要探讨佛学、哲学跟脑科学这3个领域的一个综合，对他来讲是一件很有意义的事。那在佛学上特别这边的禅修这个打坐的这样的深度的意识经验对他的脑科学事实上是有很多的启发那甚至有很多的佐证对他的理论来讲那反过来他可以再进一步从他的理论再来解释甚至预测一些禅修意识的经验这是他来法鼓山主要要学习的这个部分这是他在之前大概有讲这样的事情。那对他的脑科学的研究最重要的一个动力就是他从年轻的时候就被这个动力所这个驱动就是探讨宇宙里面怎么会有主观性这样的现象 主观性，这样就是有这样的存在，我存在，那会思考会感受啊，那这宇宙应该是一个物理的生理的啊这个一个世界，但是会有心理的意识啊，所以对这样的一种现象他一直感到很着迷啊，那所以进来做这个主观性的这个研究，那在当代当然最重要的领域就是精神医学啊，所以他是因为这样才去念医学系啊，那一直到他年轻的时候，那时候还不太有脑科学啊，所以他是慢慢才就是当脑科学开始发展啊，他大概就在第一时间进去啊，因为这个是他就是可以透过科学方式来研究这个领域的一个最佳方式。好，那本身又是精神科医师，那边可以看很多病人啊，那病人上面的一些症兆，对时间空间的一些失调的一些状况，给他很多的理论的线索啊，所以这是他一个做这一套时空神经科学理论的一个来由。那今天他主要的这个演讲分3部分啊，第一部分就是探讨这个所谓的这个从脑到心这样的连结啊，那心是脑产生的，这个几乎不用说，这个就是想当然耳啊，但是怎么产生啊，这个怎么解释，这个是大难题啊，因为两个长得很不一样啊，那脑就是这个一个灰色的物质，那里面有很多的神经传导，然后里面有很多的这些化学的一些物质的一些变化，那有些电流，但是这样的客观的物理性质、化学性质跟主观的意识现象，那个差太多了吧？所以一般主流的神经科学或者哲学对这个问题几乎就是卡在那边，顶多你只能找到这两个的相关性 correlation 那至于真的怎么讲这两个在因果上在转化上是发生什么事，这个真的是几乎是一个最大的一个人类智性上的一个难题所以他的整个学术工作大概就是要做这一块，所以他第一部分会讲这一块那第二部分他会进来讲这个精神分析那这一块大概弗洛伊德是当代的开山祖师那弗洛伊德是最早一开始也是做神经科学只是那时候要治疗病人太慢，那才自己开发出这套精神分析所以Noodle 的这套理论也可以重新回过头来再来看弗洛伊德的一些状况这是第二部分那第三部分就是静坐禅修这一块那这一块在进行的时候人可以进到很深的冰山一角的下面庞大的那一块接近非意识无意识的那整个结构那一块他刚刚说跟他在时空脑科学理论所探讨的那一个相对称性他其实觉得还蛮高的所以这块应该也会是蛮有趣的一块那所以等一下听他怎么讲 Yes
yeah. So start with it from brain to mind and I think I already cleared it. We don't have the link, there's a gap of contingency if you want to say so. So the question is, how can we close this gap? Yeah. So and the idea here is really they must share something. So brain and mind must share something. So this is a completely different approach than in Western philosophy. They say the mind is very special, something different. And then they look for something different in the brain. However, I say, they share something. What do they share? And you will see the answer is almost trivial. It goes back to some basic features in the world. Look at this quote. Nikola Tesla, the people who heard me know what I will say now, look up the Google. He's an interesting guy. Was an engineer, came from former Yugoslavia into New York, and invented certain things. And he said this beautiful quote: if you want to find the secret of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, vibration. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do. So I say maybe the energy, frequency, vibration are shared by neuronal and mental activity. So, and you will see this when you get to know me during these days. I approach everything in these spatial temporal terms. The only thing I think I may understand. Yeah, and so that's why we wrote this paper, 2020, is Spatial Temporal Dynamics, the common currency of brain and mind. And now, this is very important. This is not in this paper because this was written for a Western audience. So I have to tailor and contain my ideas. Otherwise, they kick me out. The real idea behind this goes even more basic. It's a common currency between world, brain, and mind. Because energy, frequency, vibration, dynamics are abundant in the world. Yeah. This is why I'm really so, and that means your brain is integrated and part of the world. So let me go to the next slide. So what do I mean by that? Aha, that's good. Then I can later put this into Google and know what you said. Okay, I try my best. Okay, good. And you hold your mic close too, yeah? Sorry, Kai. We know each other well enough. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So the example of the wave. Yeah, the wave, you go to the seaside here. It is not far. You see big waves. The big waves are slow and powerful. Then you have a lot of slow waves. They fast waves. They're fast, small, and less powerful. And the power of, for instance, the bigger waves, the surfer, they go to the big waves up to 10 meter high, and then if they get into the right angle into the wave, they adapt properly, align to the wave, they get all the power from the wave. And the brain is nothing else. Lower right, you see waves, meaning waves, changes in neuronal activity, fast changes, less powerful, big changes, very powerful. Slower waves. This is exactly. So I conceive the brain in terms of waves. And then, of course, I already brought the example of the surfer, that how much these waves, how much the waves of the surfer, the brain waves, and the motor, here's the dynamic waves down, here's the fluctuations in the movement, tailor and adapt to the fluctuations in the movement of the wave. The better you're aligned, the better you're feeling, and you know then you have the slow feeling and so on and so on. You all know this from your side. So that's basically where I say that's shared. Maybe you want to, here, I can't remember what comes out next. Yeah, maybe maybe the summary, that's easier. That's basically a summary of the whole story. So the dynamic spatial patterns in the brain provide indices of connection of brain and mind. You will see later, at the end of the slide, I will bring the example of depression, just for you to get an idea what I mean. Similar time-space features in brain and mind. And these are, for instance, electrical waves, certain configurations. This is not random. There's a pattern in it. When you look at the seaside, you say it's completely random. No, 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 there's a pattern in it. There's a certain order in it. And that pattern you can measure with indices from physics, engineering, and so forth. So that's why I talk a lot to physicists and engineers. Yeah, and different mental features present different kinds of space-time characteristics. I will come back to that particular later, a non-meditative state versus a meditative state, where I really try to distinguish them in spatial temporal terms in both brain and mind. I think, I can't remember what's next, but yeah, that's clear. There's basically the connection. You don't need to know this. And now that's for you. Now you can go ahead.
OK 所以刚说到就是脑跟心这两个怎么产生，怎么连结那他认为要找到他们的连结方式，你当然要找到这两个的共同点那西方的这个主流的哲学跟脑科学他们的方式不太一样，他们会去找这两个为什么不一样，因为那个心的特质真的太不一样所以他们反而一直在强调那个心是怎么样不一样但是为了要真的解释这两个，你当然要找他们两个共同一样的部分，才有办法让这个工作可以进行所以用他自己的话就是他要找这两个的 common currency 共同货币那共同货币这概念也是一个蛮好的一个譬喻就是如果我们要了解国际金融的现象，那如果不了解美元是作为这个货币交换的共同货币，那我们就会看不懂国际金融的现象所以一样的我们如果要看懂这个脑怎么产生心，然后没有去知道这个脑跟心的共同特质、共同货币是什么，那也会看不懂这两个现象是什么样的关系。那在他理论里面，这个脑跟心的共同货币就是这边讲的这个时空的一个结构这 Spatialtemporal Dynamics 这结构是一个动态的结构那他刚刚已经初步讲一下这个时空的动态结构大概是什么样的一个自然现象就是这个其实在自然界里面这种波的这种共振的这样的现象是非常基本的那所以他会从这个波的这样的一个现象作为脑跟心的共同货币那所以这边会进到很多的物理学就是用这个时空的拓扑学这种拓扑的这种空间关系这个脑的这种动态的变化这个电波这变化，然后那长的波它能量比较长那短波那些能量比较短那你看海浪也大概是这样那一种比较在海岸边那一种浪打得比较快的，那一下就打完了就没了那种能量比较短比较小但是有些波它推得很长可以这个一直推个几十公里那一种那一种是非常强大的能量的波那脑的波也是有各种这个波长的波长短的那它下面应该会讲就是这些波长短的会跟波长长的会有一个他说 nesty 的关系nesty 就是那个像俄罗斯娃娃一层一层套一层这样的一个连接关系那是透过这些不同波长的这些波有这样的连接关系才产生出这个心理这是它的一个基本的理论架构Yes.
Okay. I give you an example and on the slides, and then I give you two other examples from my experiences here. Depression. When I talk about depression, I mean the serious depression which leads you to the psychiatrist, like me or others, and you need treatment. So there have been a lot of theories about depression. And so for me, depression is a speed disorder. You're too slow. You're literally too slow. And you see that in the symptoms. Patients don't move. They sit there and don't move. Psychomotor retardation. And we measured these kind of things, and also their thoughts are too slow. So we measured them. So upper left, we measured the change of thought contents in depressed patients. So we asked them each time when your thought changes, push a button. And then we construct a time series out of that. And that's what you see upper left. For the experts, we put that into fast Fourier transform and make a power spectrum. So what you see upper left, there's a healthy subject. You see a lot of change. The thought changes over time. It was 15 minutes. Yeah. And the depressed patient, you see no change. And you also see the amplitude / the power is much less. And that's exactly what these patients experience. The thoughts don't change. It's called rumination. And they have no power. Yeah. So the thoughts are too slow there's no change, it's too slow, and they have no power. They feel powerless. They feel energy drained. That's exactly what these patients tell you. So the thoughts are too slow without power. The next thing, lower left, we did this also for visual perception. So now, you see, we look for different functions. For visual perception, now imagine, so when I present you a slow stimulus, like this one, you can follow very well. But now I do this. So your perception will be much more blurry. Yeah? So this will be really like this. And then you have a very blurry, like a Porsche passing by. Yeah? Or a fast runner, not a slow one like me. And what you see in the depressed patients, here in the healthy, you see this much more blurry. Then here is a special test for MT, visual area MT for the expert psychophysical motion suppression task. I spare you the details. But you really need to see that the depressed patient perceives her or his environment as much more static. And then, of course, then you feel disconnected, you withdraw. So your visual perception is too slow, too slow. So now the next question you ask, how about the slowness in the brain? And that's exactly what happened. Neuronal activity is too slow. It doesn't move, it doesn't change. You can see here upper right. And then also we tested lower right. We gave fast stimuli and slow stimuli into the brain while they were lying in the scanner. And indeed, again, the neuronal activity in the depressed patient didn't distinguish between fast and slow stimuli. So the brain doesn't react to fast responses. So what does this mean? There's a mismatch between the environmental speed, the outer time speed, and the inner time speed of the brain, and left the mind in the depressed patient. And that leads to misalignment. Sorry, I know I have to talk into this one. Yeah. Sorry, my arms are too long. So that leads to misalignment between the time speed of the brain mind and the time speed of the environment. The last note to that, the typical example is, I had once a patient, she was 15 years old, came with her mother, and she was severely depressed and she didn't speak at all. So later I asked her, why didn't you speak? She said, my mother was speaking too fast, I couldn't catch up, so I didn't speak at all. And the mother was speaking normal speed. Yeah. So, but that's when you ask the patients, that's what they reply. So, and that leads to a misalignment between the environmental context and the person through spatial-temporal dynamics. And then you have these symptoms. Before I go on, let me just give you two other examples. What I saw, which was very nice for me, or at least one example of alignment. When you go up to the Buddha hall up there, when you step out, you really see that sorry, now I have to take the microphone away. You see it like this, the landscape is like this, and the Buddha hall is just, in the middle, Buddha is just placed right in the middle of this landscape. So meaning your Buddha and the Buddha hall is topographically or spatially really aligned, integrated, embedded within the respective environmental context. I think it's a beautiful example. And of course, that's the way when you stand there, you feel. You feel part of the Buddha, but you also feel part of the environmental context. So you're just right in between. That's what I call alignment, temporal, or in this case, spatial alignment. And that's what our brain wants. It wants to be aligned to the context, and that gives you a good feeling and experience of synchrony, of integration, of harmony and peace and so forth. Now I shut up.
So, 所以他的刚那个波的理论最重要就是他刚讲那个 alignment 就是脑会有脑的波那世界会有世界的波，环境会有环境的波那人要有意识要有经验，就必须要人的脑的波跟你的身体产生的波，环境产生的波要有扣连这样那 那你没有扣连，你就没有意识啊。好，那这个是他在另外地方有做一些植物人大概会有这方面的经验研究。好，那他刚讲的里面那个坡有一个对于时间的一个重点那对时间呢，它不是一个像牛顿讲的那一种就是客观绝对的存在的东西那事物的发生就发生在时间里面他的是另外一种看法是莱布尼兹还有我跟他合作庄子大概是另外一种看时间的方式就是时间是在事物的活动动态的那个状态里面才产生的那所以这种动态的时间的本质呢，就会让脑自己的活动就会产生脑自己的时间因为时间是在活动里面那世界环境也会有它自己的活动，所以它内在有它自己的时间。那忧郁症的病人就是他的脑产生的那一种波动内场的时间呢，比外在的时间慢所以他就忧郁这样，因为外在的变化对他来讲就没有就是对不上一个对不上的一个状况所以他刚就是呈现这方面的一些数据就是说在想法上就是这些忧郁症的病人他可能没有什么想法上的一些变化就维持在同样的一两个想法但正常人可能那段时间想法已经有非常多变化那这样的在新的层次展现的这些状况跟脑那边发生的一些脑波的变化也大概有一个一致性的关系所以他拿这样来说明说这个他的这个波的这样的一个作为脑产生心是一个很重要的一个佐证那在视觉上也有一样的一个实证的发现 OK Yes
Okay, I gave you an idea that comes for the second part now, the psychoanalysis. And I was a little bit surprised when you asked me to put this, but I'm happy to see and I'm looking forward to for your interest in that. So going back to the history, Sigmund Freud, of course, you know, the founder of psychoanalysis and psychodynamics, he wrote a paper, 1895, Project for Scientific Psychology. And he never allowed this paper to be published because he considered it to be a failure. And he was right. It was a failure. However, it was a failure in the answers. The answers, he couldn't bridge the gap from brain to mind. But the questions he raises in this paper are fantastic. Read it. You're interested. The question he really tried to basically, he comes with the hydraulic machines because it was the engineering of the time. But he really, that's the way I read it, he tries to develop a dynamic view to link brain and mind. Psychodynamic. And that's what I'm emphasizing. Psychodynamic now, we're ready to complement this with neurodynamic. And that's what I call spatial-temporal neuroscience. Yeah? So they share the topography and dynamic, as I already indicated. So I give you a couple of examples. What do I mean by that? The notion of self is, of course, a very contentious notion in this context. So we will have to discuss this further. And I have my answers and see how they converge with your answers. So when I speak of a sense of self, you have the feeling, yeah, that's me. It's me. It belongs to me. Despite I'm aging, I'm still the same person. And I said, yeah, this is me. And even that's confusing when we saw each other here in triple versions on the screen when we are standing like this. You're confused. Yeah. If I were basically would have psychotic tendencies, I would have difficulties to distinguish. Is me this one or the one I see there? Remember in this copying. So, and then you have, as a psychiatrist, I met quite a number of famous people in my life. And you see some of them down there. So not that you think that I'm psychotic, yeah. But it's really because they really take on the identity, they feel the identity as if they are these people. And interestingly, there's a cultural variance to it. So you would probably not meet a Buddha in Germany, but I met some Buddhas in China. Yeah, I met Nofretete in Germany, but that was an Egyptian immigrant. Yeah, so there we are. That's very interesting, the cultural variance of that. So just a second. Good. So let me see the self. Remember, one of the key features I emphasize, and I think that really distinguishes our approach from many other approaches in neuroscience, is the layers. Yeah, so over the last 2-3 years, the findings really suggest that there are different layers in the brain and not just one layer or 2 layers. So, and here, this is a data-driven meta-analysis of 400 studies which we conducted. And what we basically saw that our sense of self, all kinds of imaging studies from fMRI, I spare you the detail, the paper is lower left, that there are different layers of the self in the brain. First layer is about the input you receive from your own body. Interoceptive, it's called, your inner body. And that is sort of processed, this is not written here because I had to do it for the reviewers like this. This is not just the inner body, but these are also regions in the brain where we have a convergence between the inner body input and the outer body input. For the expert, subcortical regions, insula, you see some of that here, thalamus. Yeah, but for the Western reviewers, I really had to write this interoceptive process because they think in terms of entities. Yeah, so then the second layer, you see some other regions up there. It's the extroceptive and the proprioceptive processing. So it's the environmental input and relation to my outer body. So here it's the inner body relation to the outer world. Here is the outer body in relation to the world. So extroceptive, proprioceptive. Yeah, and again, and then go up the hierarchy, you see the mental self. That's basically when you think about your own self. And that's probably the self you try to detach yourself from in meditation. I come back to that. Yeah, that's a really interesting thing, and the findings support that. So, and you see again yet other regions, cortical midline regions, default mode regions for the specialist. So now the most interesting thing, what I found really interesting, when we first saw the data, I said, wow, this is unbelievable. So these regions are all replicated here, plus some additional regions. You see this here. This is the lowest layer. The region is here and also in the next higher layer. Then you have some additional regions, and they are again up here, plus additional regions. And these were all, for the experimentalists among you, all independent studies. So what does this amount to? It amounts to nestedness. The classical example for nestedness in the European context is Russian dolls. In China, you have a much more beautiful crystal. Yeah? Same shape, different sizes. Yeah? So here, same regions, different sizes, something is added. So it's a nested organization. Yeah? We indicated that here. And these are layers of self. And when my theory is right, these layers of self in your brain, the topography of self, should correspond to layers in experience. Yeah? So you should have corresponding layers in experience. And think some of your meditation experiences correspond very well to that. As I said, I come back to that later. I forgot them. I'm sorry. Here's basically the same thing. And now here is a link to psychoanalysis. You see in the sketch, you can say that the inter-exoceptive self is very close to what psychoanalysis describes as it. You can say that the exoceptive, proprioceptive self is very close to your ego. And your mental self, very close to your superego. So you see here you can make bridges between the psychodynamic concepts and the empirical findings of neuroscience. You want to go? I can't remember what is the next slide.
Yeah, you can stop a little bit.
Yeah, stop here because now other stuff comes. Yeah, sorry.
所以他就说那个自我不是铁板一块它有不同层次的自我那它也对应到我们的大脑，它在处理资讯的时候它有不同层次的那个处理的方式所以最底层就是身体它会有这个处理环境给它一些刺激那一种很基本的那个资讯的处理。那在那个层次就有一个基本层次的自我会在那边然后第二个层次就是你内在的这个身体跟大脑跟环境这个之间也会有一个复杂的一个资讯交换的过程那边会有第二个层次的自我那到第三个层次就是你光用想的跟外在世界就没有直接关系你直接脑袋在那边想那个是第三个层次也会有一个自我在那边那这三个层次就是在经验现象上会有它的自我感然后在脑的活动上面也会有它脑的不同的一个呈现然后这三个层次呢也刚好对应到弗洛伊德那边讲的本我、自我、超我，讲那个 ID、ego 还有那个 super ego 简单讲大概是这样。
Okay, I just got in pace. Okay, so now what huge implications of that? So now we work with that hierarchy in psychiatric disorders, like depression, where we assume is abnormally shifted towards the mental pole. Let's say the upper dole is too big, and that of course disbalances. Here I show you an even more interesting implication, which I'm working with on a former student in Italy who is now in Bergamo, Andrea Scalabrini, who is a neuroscientist and also actually a Jungian psychoanalyst. It's very interesting. So, what is the idea here? When you have certain environmental events / traumatic events, so which depends the kind of event, the layer it affects. So we assume that maybe, it's very tentative, it's the early days here, that maybe there's a relationship between the kind of traumatic events and the layer of self it is affected. Give you an example. When you, so that is basically indicated here, particular like this one, and I give you an example. That's of course intuitive, speculative, but it's something one can research. So let's say when your mother is breastfeeding you, and your mother is extremely nervous and tense, is extremely anxious, has very irregular movements, like this, it does it like this, and usually when you breastfeed, you know that the mother is usually very calm, it's very slow movements, has a low voice, a low, slow, powerful voice. And that connects to the infant. But now if the mother is like this and very irregular and tense and herself anxious, not fully comfortable, that maybe the infant gets a certain dynamic pattern or that it later associated with a traumatic event. So I could imagine that later in adulthood, that dynamic pattern of this irregular movement will re-invoke the traumatic experiences. Without being able to have exactly the same content, but the feelings associated with that come up again. And they're usually dissociated, meaning isolated, which is called dissociation. So here you see it's a lack of synchronization, and that's very important. You need to be synchronized, you need to be aligned with your larger environmental context, / in that case, the mother, and that gives you peace and develops your own dynamic structure. That's our brain is extremely context sensitive, and we are now currently running a lot of experiments. I know I need to hold it closer. A lot of experiments where we really try to show this environmental dependence, how the brain's dynamic spatial temporal structure is dependent upon the spatial temporal structure of the environment, and that in turn shapes your experience. That degree of matching is called complexity matching or stochastic matching, shapes your environmental context. And then maybe here your interoceptive self might be extremely weak of that infant because it doesn't have the slow frequencies, the slow, powerful frequency. So it's very unstable, and each time similar dynamic pattern resurface, the person will experience anxiety. I think I have more to trauma. Oh, I don't know why I showed that one. Okay, yeah, leave it. Maybe you want to translate that.
Yeah.
I think it's a good example.
所以他就是把刚刚那3个自我的层次跟这个脑上面也有3个不同层次还有精神分析的3个不同的层次这边就直接用一些精神病状的这个状况来说明那所以在很基础的那个层次，你说小婴儿那他可能就是在最早期跟母亲的互动，那边有这个互动的这种共振的失调上就会产生他的这些日后的一些精神疾病的一些种子所以一个母亲在那边很安稳的摇的这过程那看起来小婴儿应该是比较容易进入跟母亲共振的状况那个 alignment 的状况大概就会比较好那如果母亲是在那边躁动那看起来小婴儿就会比较辛苦比较难跟他做 alignment 当然这边我刚在听会想问说那这小婴儿如果天赋异禀也可以跟着躁动的母亲共振得很好会不会日后还是没问题这等一下我再问他但是应该是那个像大海一样的母亲那种稳定的应该是对小 baby 会比较友善那这样在之后就是他 alignment 好那他各方面的情绪性格可能会比较稳定所以他刚是在讲3个层次里面一个很基础的层次在最早期就会展现这样的一个可以印证他理论还有包括弗洛伊德理论的一些整合的一些说法 Yes
For instance, when I speak, you will see, you see the term traumatic or topographic reorganization, that the 3 layers of the self shift. It's a topographic reorganization. Yeah. Let's say, imagine, for instance, I do an experiment, and you allow me to do an experiment here. So I go to the Buddha hall and shift the big middle Buddha more to the right or to the left, if you allow me. Yeah. So, and I'm sure that the experience when you stand in front of that square relative to the environment will be completely different. And I'm sure the architect measures that. Yeah. That means there's a topographic reorganization. It impacts your mental state. Same with the brain and the world user trauma. So, next one. I think we don't need that. Yeah, see, I often, some of you already know that. I often like to compare what the brain does to what a painter does to a painting. So when you look at the painting, it's a 2D canvas and it's static. So the physical, the objective physical features is static and 2D, 2-dimensional. Now, this, as you know, is a painting by Leonardo da Vinci. So look at this. First, you have the feeling it's 3D. There's a depth in the room. Yeah. How does he do that? He does that here, this is marble, that he places brown and white marble interjacent, and that gives you a 3D impression. So he fools you. Yeah. The 3D. And same in the Chinese paintings. When you see a river, some stones, river, stones, that gives you again a 3D. And the depth impression, basically, you have the feeling you walk right into the mountains. So, and then the other thing, what he does here, you see, when you go into details, I spoke to some art historians. You see, when you look into details, first you see these different gestures. There's this one here that, of course, introduces dynamics. But when you look into details, the outer surfaces in Da Vinci's are never straight lines. They're slightly fluctuating lines. Why did he do that? Because the guy was absolutely brilliant, because he studied visual perception, and he said, we never perceive clearly straight lines. So that's why he put them into the painting, because he wanted to make the paintings as real as possible. So he adapted, basically he knew the brain better than we do. Yeah? So, and same in your paintings, when you have these mountains, and you have these lines on the mountains, there's also fluctuating lines. You have the feeling that the mountain moves. It's dynamic. I love these paintings because I'm part of the landscape. Yeah, I basically walk in there. Yeah, I'm embedded. That gives me a great feeling. Here, you're basically part of the feeling, but you don't want to be part of this one. You don't want to betray him. Yeah. So yeah, but that's what you have. You're part of the thing. That's the way, and that tells you a lot how our brain works, because they use features / dynamic topography. These are exactly the same features with which the brain itself works too. That's the way mental features are. So here you have a virtual dynamic, a virtual topography, and that's exactly what in the painting, but you have exactly such virtual topography, virtual dynamic also in your consciousness, in your experience. It's a subjective personal space. Yeah, it's not objective. It's a subjective dynamic of feeling, experience of time. It's a virtual time. It's a virtual space we experience, and that shapes your emotions, your cognitions, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, I think I leave that for you to translate. Sorry.
所以就是说，我们的时空上在客观现实上的这个布置会直接影响到我们在主观经验上的呈现。所以他刚一开始讲的，他昨天在那个布达那个大佛宝殿，那个就是最壮观的那个殿，然后往外看，然后后面是3个那个布达。那他说那个空间上就是对称的关系，那他就站在那个中线上面。那如果你说那个布达往左偏移，往右偏移，那整个主观经验你就会觉得没有那么畅快。所以他说那个建筑师他一定是知道这整个这个空间上山水上的结构，然后把它做一定的设计，以至于我们站在那个点中线的那个点，我们的大脑就会以这样的方式运作，以至于我们在主观经验上就会产生和谐感等等。所以刚刚讲绘画也是类似的状况，就是达文西的绘画因为他知道大脑是动态的空间的这种运作的一个方式还有包括视觉上所以他在线条的这个色彩的一些处理上面，他就以动态的方式去处理那以至于你看起来的主观经验就会是一个有深度空间的经验等等那中国山水画也是运用同样的道理，虽然中国山水画可能在空间上可能跟西方的会很不一样那边我觉得应该还有一些更多东西要去讲，不过基本上应该中国山水画的画家应该也是掌握到深度大脑空间运作的状况才能够把他的中国山水画画成你视觉上你看起来就是融在里面的那个感觉那两边应该有相同的地方那不同地方我觉得那个应该是另外一个可以做研究的地方这样Gil, I was extending a little bit to wonder that there might be some difference between the Chinese painting with the Western painting in terms of the depth presentation that might require a little bit further investigation, but the basic dynamic topological kind of understanding might be similar in both cases.
Okay. So I think probably skip that one just for So here I made some, I could talk about narcissism, but I don't want to do that. Also in the interest of time. The idea is here really to what Freud said, there's a project for scientific psychology to complement that on a deeper layer by a project for spatial-temporal neuroscience. And ultimately that links really neurodynamic and psychodynamic. And for me, myself, I think I have it in the next slide. No, it's not in the next slide. It's a book of mine coming out on neuropsychoanalysis. It basically just came out in these days. It's a short book. And to my own surprise, when I was writing it, it was just almost very fluent, the transitions from the neuronal to the psychological. Yeah, it's really amazing. So that's really psychodynamic. That's why I like to speak of psychodynamics rather than just psychoanalysis. Yeah. So that's quite amazing because it really gives you a new view, and also you can test all this. When you talk with me in more detail later after my talk or later, I don't know, we can really test, experimentally quantify, measure these kind of things without losing the phenomenon. Yeah. So the space, even if you say all not of your space-time stuff is crazy, forget it. At least it leads you to some new interesting experimental ideas like the thought. Remember the thought testing where we look for the change in thought going. Nobody ever did that. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think you want to translate this? I didn't say much. So, yeah.
所以他刚就大概说到那个弗洛伊德他的这个project， 那他 project 后来是精神分析这样那精神分析那边本我、自我、超我有一套比较心理学式的一个理论虽然这心理学是到比较潜意识的层次那但是因为弗洛伊德那时候的脑科学还真的是还很草创，几乎没有以至于他的脑科学那一块只能大致空白那但是对于这种本我、自我、超我那边有一个动态的一个结构的一种关系跟变化这一块这个 Noodle 教授应该是觉得相当有洞见所以他的整个脑科学的理论这种时空动态结构的这种变化的理论他觉得可以进来把弗洛伊德之前没有讲成功讲完整的把它补齐但还是这样
Okay, so now this is probably the most interesting part for you to say here what this Western guy, neuroscience guy, brain guy has to say about meditation. As you probably know, meditation is extremely popular in the West, and but it's very interesting. I attended in last September a meeting. I was invited on a conscious conference in India, and they were a little bit smiling about the Western people. Let's say basically it was put into the slogan, mindfulness is not meditation, meditation is not Buddhism. Yeah, so the Western, and I think there's some truth to it. Without of being really able to judge. So we went into this meditation thing, and I usually, with my spatial temporal approach, and as always, some student who was very interested in that poked my interest. And then over the last 3-4 years, we really worked on this. And now we have a whole line of meditation research because I find it so instructive. I learn a lot from my brain science. It's fascinating. And I hope I can expand that here. So as you know, the concept of duality, non-duality is the key. I don't need to tell you that. I think we were already touching upon it yesterday. I don't go in any definition issues here, not in the presence of an abundance of experts. So I refrain, we can discuss later. What I mean by duality here, very simple. There's a duality between self and other, in my experience, between self and environment. You phrased it yesterday as subject-object. So keep it as simple, and I'm looking forward to the discussion to enrich that. So, and here on the left, you see the self-other distinction is really, you see, it's the own environment versus the other environment, the own body versus the other body, the own emotions versus the other emotions, the own thoughts versus the other thoughts. And that goes back to certain beliefs. So, however, when you go into meditation proficiency, I don't need to tell you that we have sort of a non-duality. You don't distinguish between own and other environment. It's just one environment. It's just the bodies, you feel synchronized, you feel connected. Same for the other things. But as I said, you know this much better in this. Also, there's some very good people in the Western tradition, for instance, Yusipovich in New York, who did a lot of interesting research on that. So that's one line, that's the duality. So when you will see how I approach this in terms of science. Then the other thing which is very important if you want to get a little bit, so I make a distinction between the induction techniques and the meditative state itself. You see here, non-dual awareness is a final common pathway into which different roads, different meditation techniques can lead. And I think that's very important because it's often not distinguished. So, and different people might prefer different kinds of induction techniques. Yeah? Breathing, you know, I don't need to tell you different breathing techniques. As I was told yesterday, you don't focus so much on specific breathing techniques. Yeah, so you present the brain with more or less input. I like the running. For me, the running in nature, it almost can end up in a meditative-like state, also with the synchrony of the movements, and so on and so forth. I think that's very important because it's a particular state of the brain, and obviously we can discuss this further. So here, and what we investigated in the study is really, and that's the first study doing that, we investigated the naive meditator, developing meditator, proficient meditator. So how our brain changes throughout this trajectory, which I don't need to tell you, can take years, if not decades. So, and what we indicated here, that with increasing meditation proficiency, you have increasing non-dual awareness. Yeah, so I think the first author, the student of mine, Austin Cooper, did a very nice job visualizing the duality of the experience. And here you're completely immersed, part of the environment. As I said, for me, when you stand in front of the Buddhas and have the landscape, you're really part of that trajectory from the middle Buddha to the middle of these two mountains. Yeah, there's no distinction anymore. And the architect, I'm sure that was intentional. Yeah, because it's so well done. Yeah, so that's basically, yeah, maybe you want to translate here because it's an important issue.
所以他这几年来就是开始对静坐这一块的意识经验就是说他的研究团队也开始做比较多的研究特别是意大利、欧洲那边那边有蛮多这方面的实作的人欧洲人然后当然来到法鼓山就是也希望在这一块是更深入的地方来做进一步的探讨。那然后他在前一阵子到印度那也遇到那边的一些僧人，然后跟他们讨论的过程他们也在笑西方人因为在西方那个正念mindfulness很流行那印度的这边就会觉得这个 mindfulness 有一点粗浅嘛就是说这 mindfulness 也不等于meditation meditation 也不等于佛教等等所以意思是整个佛教的内涵比 mindfulness 应该是更丰富。那他这边就是也大概带着这样的一个这个了解他应该是相信情况应该是这样所以就进来特别看这个静坐经验里面经验到那个自我跟外在是不分的那样的一个经验那个自我跟外在不分这边可以在思想上在情感上在身体上然后在自我上不分 你有不同层次但是重点是这个有分跟不分那正常经验是有分，然后静坐成功的状况是不分所以这方面他们有做一些研究那重点是他透过脑科学这边的一些学理来看到就是要达到不分的意识经验你可能不只是可以透过静坐可能其他方式也可以达到那样的状态那包括这个他自己喜欢跑步所以早上在法鼓山的园区就有一个红衣人就在园区里面这个已经这个到处出现就是他早上去静坐去了就是用他的方式那在 I'm again telling some
You're not contradicting me.
No. I said you are famous already in Dharma Drum because there is a guy in a red coat running around in the campus.
How do you know it was me? Assumptions.
And do you know it's yourself?
I don't know. Okay. So, yeah?
Yeah, so let me finish the last part. 所以他就是说实证上就是说他那样跑可能也可以跑到一个脑波的状态，那状态看起来就跟一个静坐的可能没有两样，但是达到的方式不一样等等。那他自己说如果要他坐在那边他再坐不住但是让他这样跑到天人合一，跑到这个没有二分，这个他可以这样
Okay, so my morning run is like the morning prayer for you. Yeah, really. Okay. So now I say, you see that's the title of the paper. So you have a certain spatial experience in your meditation. You're no longer distinct from the environment, but you're part of it, you're immersed. I said, architecture, my example, can induce that. Meditation can induce that. So that's why we speak, there's a certain topographic organization or reorganization of your experience / your spatial experience. And that shapes your emotions, your feelings, and so forth. So, and now we say, do we have an analogous topographic reorganization in the brain? Not only in your experience, but also in your brain. And is that topographic reorganization in your brain related to your topographic reorganization of your spatial experience? That's what we can see here. So, and this is all data-based. You see, I'm a scientist, I want findings, and it was really amazing. So we have, let's say here we specified that for two particular networks, the forward mode network, which is more internally oriented for your own sense of self, / the blue stuff, the DMN. And then there's what is called a control executive network, which is more outward oriented, particularly for my goal oriented action. So when I go here to here, then my CEN will be a lot involved. And when you ring the bell and you say, stop, Georg, then I will take the bell. So I can talk longer. So that's all CEN, but when I just stand here and just in my own and saying and I'm musing, I'm not really responding anymore to cues, then I'm very much immersed in my DMN. So, and what we see, usually there's a negative relationship. You see this here, spatial dynamic. If the one is stronger, the other one is weaker. Makes sense. If I go here, take the bell, I cannot think so much about myself, and vice versa. No worry. And you see that also however, when you're going in a deep meditative state, particularly as a proficient meditator, you can show that this negative relationship is a balanced relationship. It's not that the one becomes stronger when the other one is weaker and vice versa. So they completely synchronize with each other. So they go in the same direction. And that means, experientially, you don't make any more a difference because your brain is so organized, it doesn't make a difference anymore between inside and outside. Yeah? And that's your topographic reorganization. You see this here, we indicated here, they're very much synchronized with each other. Yeah? Yeah, when the one becomes more stronger, the other one too. So they're really in tune with each other. Yeah. So it's not that the one becomes stronger or weaker, but they're really in tune, and you can see this, and you can show the same for the sensory regions of the brain, the input regions. So your brain, literally, your experience is one of synchrony with the environmental context. I call this alignment. And that's exactly what you see in the brain. So you have a non-dual organization in the topography of your brain, and that matches with a non-dual experience in meditation. Yeah, and this is basically indicated that, I think, I can't remember what I had as next slide. Yeah, here, this basically is a summary slide. You see again, I think it's a very nice what he did here. You see more synchrony between the networks, much more connected. Yeah, and not this negative relationship. Yeah, but here. And that, you see here, you experience yourself more part of the environment and no longer as distinct in a dual way. So the dual topography of the brain is replaced by non-dual topography in the brain as well as in experience. And here you also see the dynamic, the time range. We have a much larger range of time scales, dynamic, in professional meditator. And what does this mean? If I have more time scales in my brain, I can much better react to the different time scales in the environment. So I can synchronize. I can perceive the music in a much more fine-grained way, which I cannot do when I'm a native, in beginning meditator. And I think that goes with many experience, which I was told from meditators in my own, that suddenly you perceive the details in a much more fine-grained way because you probably have a better corresponding time scale in your brain. So experimentally, this means you want to analyze the time scales in your environmental context and see how much they match with the time scales of your brain. So, and that's really a thing that you see in professional meditators. So that's why I like to speak of a topographic dynamic reorganization model of meditation. So maybe I put that slide back on, and which one you want, this one or this one? Or maybe this one?
Yeah, does not matter. It's so difficult anyway.
There could be other reasons why it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, we have people with physics background. I think they will come to help later. 所以他这边就是跟 Cooper 他之前的学生做的研究，就是很具体的把他的这个时空脑科学这部分做一个展示。那基本的想法应该是在物我不分那个 non-duality 的那一种比较高端的静坐经验里面，就是在就是 neural 的时空的这种拓扑空间上的分布关系它会比较平衡这是内在的刺激的处理跟外在环境的刺激的处理呢，它达到一个充分平衡的状态，以至于物我不分这样那正常的人大概就是两边的这个平衡度那一种扣紧的程度就相对没那么高所以看起来透过一些实修实练可以去增强这样的一个能力跟状况那在主观经验上这个在神经的层次你跟世界的关系那个波的那种连接状况它会有一个呈现那直接会对应到你在心理意识上你也会有这样的一个呈现更高端的他就会感到 non-duality 的经验然后正常人就相对比较没有
Thank you. Okay, now the self. Now, of course, is a key point. So I was often confronted with the assumption, yes, in meditation there's a no self. And I know many people say that. And that means for me, there's a certain type of self which you detach from in meditation. But it's not that there's no self, there's no subjectivity anymore. That I don't believe. Why? Because if you had no subjectivity at all, you would be unable to experience anything at all. Because experience is intrinsically subjectivity. And all my research is basically about that. So let me tell you, remember the 3 layers of self, which we discussed. And remember the interoceptive, the inner body, the outer body, and the mental. So what you can observe, again, data-driven, I don't show the details here, that the regions which are associated with the mental self are less activated in proficient meditators. Whereas the regions associated with the the interoceptive process, in particular here, inner body relative to the outer world, are much more activated compared to naive, to beginning meditators. So you really see, and this was done by Bianca, one of my Italian students who's now into meditation, that you can really see you have a topographic reorganization of the layers of self. Usually the mental self dominates and you have all these cognitions and thoughts and worries and anxieties and blah, 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 blah. Whereas your interoceptive, your body remains more in the background. However, your intro-extroceptive coupling here in the lower layer, again, we had to just reduce it for interoceptive for the Western reviewers. But it's really, when you look at the regions, intro-extroceptive coupling, thalamus, for instance, in other subcortical regions, that's exactly what you experience in meditation. And you use, for instance, many use the breathing to getting into that state. But the breathing is just an induction method to basically shift the focus from your mental through the extroceptive to this leg. Yeah? So it's just an induction method. You can induce this also in different ways. Yeah? And I think that's exactly what you have. When you have an intro-extroceptive alignment, your own inner body and your outer body is aligned with the extroceptive input. That's exactly where you have this kind of experience you have. That's non-duality. Yeah? So, and that is really data-driven, that the regions change their thing when you have go to a proficient meditative state. Maybe you want to translate that. Let me see, is there more in there? Yeah, maybe you want to.
Yes. 所以这张图其实画得还蛮好的，蛮清楚的啊。就左边是正常人的，那右边是比较高端静坐的人啊。那他们的这个意识经验就很不一样啊。那刚刚说到有3个层次的意识经验啊，那最上面是那个 mental self 啊，就是我们在所思所想那边就会感觉有自我在那边。那大概我们正常大概大部分是在那个所思所想很清楚的部分。那但是还有下面比较就是身体的感觉，你身体的感觉那边也会有自我感在里面。那当然就没有在想东西那时候的自我那么明确，但是也有。那更下层当然就是直接更基础的那一种自我感。可能基础到你不会察觉到，但是还是有的。那在高端的打坐经验的人呢，他就是可以把最上层的那一种 mental self 就是那种所思所想比较一般比较明确的那种自我，把它这个消融到最低，然后让比较中层跟下层的那个很初阶的那一种自我感那边会比较浮现。这样。这大概是他们在研究上在上面有数据可以支持发生这样的变化。
Now, I'm very close to the end, so I leave that out, probably too complicated. No, I didn't put that slide in there. Okay, so that basically now, more general, meditation is for me a fantastic example to learn for consciousness in general. And one important, for me at least, the way I see it, conceptual difference between the notion of consciousness in your part of the world and in the Western. That in the Western world, it is used in a much narrower way. It's just one cognitive function among others. As if cognition, emotions, etc. are independent of consciousness. Yeah, it's just one cognitive function. However, here, as I understand it, it's a much wider notion. It's basically the floor, yeah, on which we stand, on any kind of function, cognitive, emotion, sensory, perceptual, motor, stands on. So basically, in the Western tradition, the notion of consciousness is just one piece of furniture among many others in the room, whereas, as I understand your tradition, I knew this. That's why I should have taken the bell earlier. Okay. Give me 5 minutes, and then 5 to 10 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Now I lost my train of thought. So it's basically one piece of furniture among many others in the Western tradition, whereas in the Eastern tradition, it's really the floor itself of the room. So, and I think what the empirical data and my own experience tell me, I go with the Eastern tradition. And I think it's a key in solving this mind-brain problem, and we establish what we call the temporal spatial theory of consciousness with different mechanisms. I don't want to go into details about that. So, and that's why we speak of spatial temporal neuroscience, that we say, you see, I locate consciousness right here, and then all the other branches of neuroscience as a derivative, because you really need to look at dynamic, and ultimately here the word brain dynamic. And I think your meditation, the deeper layers of meditation are here. Yeah, they're here. The really proficient deeper layer meditation, and the more naive, maybe up there. So you have, which I didn't indicate yet, different layers in this picture. And I think with that I'm almost there. What I think is important, what you indicated here, you have the brain at the bottom of the iceberg, exactly where the iceberg interfaces with the water. And the water, of course, is here a synonym for the world or the environment. Yeah, that's why I like to speak philosophically of the world-brain relation. So, and these are different layers of consciousness. Forget this one, because that comes from psychoanalysis, which I think is problematic. Yeah, because that's the Western nomenclature. Yeah, consciousness is one specific feature. Yeah, and so, and what is very interesting, and I would be very eager maybe to get on a journey with you together, that we map these different layers here from the top to the bottom. These are different layers of experience. And if we can chart them and map them also then in terms of neuronal mechanism, we might also be able to individualize and improve meditation techniques and experiences. Yeah, because then I know for the I'm sure you have the experiences that there are huge inter-individual differences between different people. And you might need to offer them meditation protocols which are more tailored for their individual needs. So, and with that, I come to my talk. I hope that spatial temporal neuroscience can contribute to resolve the duality or dualism of mind and brain, and ultimately of mind and world. And that's where I think is a possible contribution, which I think could also be very helpful and for me very exciting to apply to meditation and other instances. Thank you very much.
最后的部分就是他大概在说他应该是作为西方文明的一个叛徒这样就是这个意思是说西方的主流大概传统上一直把自我跟意识放在所有的人类心理经验的最高层这样自我意识，然后下来控管我们的认知，下来那认知理性再控管我们的情感情绪，情感情绪再控管我们的本能反应，这样下来那人类最重要大概就是理性跟自我是最高，但他现在把它做180度的调转对他整套理论他觉得自我跟意识是在最 底层，他说是那个 floor 就是那个地板。那在上面再加上本能，然后加上情绪，加上认知加上理性这是他的整个心理结构图。那他觉得东方的传统应该是后面这个图这样所以在说打坐经验，他就是可以发现人的那个理性的自我，那个是很快就可以把它去掉的，相对很快但是一层一层下去，你会发现那个比较低层次那个自我，那个是更基础的那所以所以他的整套理论叫 World Brain Relation 或 World Brain Transformation 大概就是在讲这个世界跟脑它作为一个动态的整体性的一个结构，是这个当基础才会产生意识经验那再产生自我经验，再产生情绪经验，再产生这个理性这种能力那然后这种心灵的特征，它本质上不是跟这种世界跟脑的这种动态关系本质上不是两件事这样西方的主流会认为心跟脑本质上是两种完全不一样的东西这是很哲学的一个探讨那哲学上他自己的答案是认为确实是有新的现象但是作为新的现象它确实也很特别但是在本质上它不是跟物或者跟这种脑心的波讲波也许更恰当它跟这种脑跟世界跟脑的波的这种关系，它不是不一样的东西这样本质上这大概如果因为他今天的探讨比较没有放在哲学上本体论上的探讨比较没有他比较放在精神医学心理分析还有他整个脑科学理论在探讨但是他最后有点到这个在哲学上本体论上心脑是不是二元，那他觉得不是二元但是这种不是二元的一元应该是一元，但这一元呢应该严格上讲起来也不是传统讲的心或身那就是一套不要用传统的化约的方式来看我这也许等一下可以再多做一点探讨所以大概是这样so 我再把棒子交回给我们的邓主任
All right 那我要到哪里我坐在这边好 So thank you very much Professor Noto for your wonderful talk and it's a very clear and succinct introduction of your research and I believe there are many curiosities and questions for you but as a moderator I was given a mission to not comment on your talk but maybe posit some questions OK 就是我大概就是问个问题然后接下来就是我们大家可以问问题 So because I want to read my question from here that's why I'm sitting and it's a dialogue so one of the main gains from cross-disciplinary dialogue there's an echo very beautiful the sound echoing it's like a concert so one of the main gains from cross-disciplinary dialogue is mutual learning from different disciplinary perspectives on the same subject matter. And the common subject matter between you, your presentation and Buddhism are the nature of consciousness or mind. So consciousness or mind and the training of it or meditation. So what I, as a Buddhist scholar of mind, would learn from you is to get possible explanation or comment from your expertise of brain science on what Buddhism has to say about meditation. So first of all, in a very simple terms, the whole purpose of cultivation of mind or meditation in Buddhism is to develop an insight perception of the body-mind compound, which we call a person or self, as well as the world we live in. This insight perception, according to Buddhism, is aligned, using your favorite word, is aligned with the true nature of everything, which put in Nikola Tesla's word, the secret of the universe, which is the secret of the universe, and which is called Spatialtemporal in Sanskrit, commonly translated into English as dependent origination. So simply put, things come into existence not from some sort of creator, C capital, nor randomly, but from a series of necessary conditions, which is not only common to brain and mind, but to everything. So this insight perception is essential in Buddhism because Buddha taught that the root cause for the problem of existence is the wrong perception of our mind, body, self, and the world. And it is this wrong perception that we mentally construct the sense of self, and henceforth the whole emotional problems and the problems of the cycle of rebirth. In order to develop such insight perception, our mind has to be trained to attain a certain high concentrated state of mind, which Buddhism called samadhi or sammeding in Chinese. Such mind is static, accompanied with meditation joy, clear, without obstacle from emotional defilements. And such mind, or state of mind, then is ready to be trained further to develop this insight perception we just mentioned. And such state of mind supposedly attained by the Buddha does not construct any sense of self, among other things. So, do you think such state of mind and its training process can be explained brain scientifically? And what can you comment on such state of mind and its training process? 比较就是我们这种跨领域的对话，就是一个很重要的目的，就是能够互相学习啦。那我当然没有办法，是，不要戴口罩。就是我当然没有办法 comment 这个Notof 老师的这个 presentation 但是我想问一个问题啦，就是如果从那个脑科学从那个 Notof 老师的那个专业来看，佛教的这个 meditation 或者是新的训练能不能够给我们一些解释或者是 make sense 这样？那我是说，我们这个佛教最基本的那个 meditation 和新的训练，就是要发展我们叫智慧嘛，我这边讲叫 insight perception。那这种智慧呢，它能够让我们见到，从佛教的角度来说啦，可以见到这个事物的实相，就真实的样貌啦。那这个真实的样貌，我们知道就是缘起嘛，因为事物它的真实样貌就是它不是什么创造者创造的，它就是一系列必要的那个因缘条件而形成，包括我们的身跟心，还有这个自我的这样子的概念，就是我这个概念的建构了。那要能够发展出这样子的训练，这样子的具有这样智慧的心的话，那我们要有一些训练嘛。其中一个前准备工作就是让我们心能够比较亲近，比较专注或者是像我们说的那种比较像有一点像定那样子的训练。 那我只是问说，如果从那个 Notov 老师的这个专业来看，这样子的新的训练啊，能不能够就是用脑科学来说明它是不是有意义，能不能 make sense 这样子？
Yeah, thank you for an excellent question. I just go with the data here. You clearly have, you know this one very well, from naive meditator developing proficient meditator. I don't have the slide. In the Indian tradition, you have these different layers of experience. And I think there's clear phenomenological evidence that you have a reorganization of your experience in meditation. And the very, very proficient meditator is probably not even just a state, it's already the trait. The whole person has this, even in the non-meditative state, this non-dual topographic organization. So, and these are really data-driven, that you really see this reorganization of the neuronal networks in naive versus proficient meditators. So, yes, you can train it, no doubt. But it's probably what we saw in our data, and I'm sure that matches your experience, huge inter-individual differences. Yeah, and the question is, where do these come from? At least in the empirical data, I don't know how to your experience on the phenomenological level, but huge inter-individual differences, and that probably comes to the fact that everybody has a different baseline from where she or he starts. Yeah, and that's where research could come in. Let's say if you could determine the initial baseline state, then you could devise a meditation protocol accordingly and make it easier for that person maybe to get into a more proficient state of experience. So I see a very, besides all the theoretical support, empirical support for that your experiences are real and have a neuronal basis, which I think is already something, but it's even more, you can use it in a very practical sense to improve your meditation techniques. So I say this because I'm also a psychiatrist, because I want to use some of my insights for improving the mental diagnostic and therapy. And I could even imagine that some of these protocols, if properly aligned, we can use for mental disorders. But for that, we really need the brain science. Yeah.
王华帮忙翻译一下刚刚讲的嘛。对啊，他基本上他的实证的 data 是可以看到那个比较高端的静坐的人，他可以做出来的这过程的这种脑波的这种时空的分布状态。那再早一点，其实也刚有讲到一点，就是说他可以从那样的这些状态呢回过来看到每个实作者禅修者他已经大概做到哪个层次。那在这基础上可以再去个别化，去为他们去找出合适他们可以精进的一些方式，这样。那他在精神医疗那边就是说这是另外一个相关的一个没有直接跟静坐有关比如说一些忧郁症的躁郁症的这些病人那因为他们的时空的一些经验，还有时空的脑的一些特质使得他可以根据他们的每个个人去做一些设计那这设计也甚至可以发展你说机器人的状况可以跟他对话，那对话的那种频率跟时间速度可以去配合他们比如说他刚讲到有病人他跟他妈妈讲话，他觉得妈妈讲的话太快，所以他根本就直接就没办法处理那所以因为他内在的时间这个远比外面妈妈讲话正常的速度慢很多所以他就可以设计一些刺激那机器人也好那实际上机器人可能会比人好因为我们正常人可能没有办法讲话特别慢因为我们会忍不住但机器人不会这是一个例子那机器人的速度可能就会比较慢 但是比那个忧郁症的内在时间的那种速度可能再快一点。那透过这样的一个互动，就可以让这个忧郁症的这个病人在那样的环境下改善他的状况。那这是其中的例子。那但是放到静坐禅修这边，可能他也会透过他的这种解读来看这个实作的人他大概达到哪个状况，然后再下去可以做一些调整。大概是他的一些看法。慧敏法师看起来。那接下来就邓老师跟我就一起主持，那就开放问题。好，慧敏法师。
Thank you very much for your very inspiring lecture. May I ask the slide number 17? Sorry about it.
This one.
Yes. Would you mind to tell us about the mechanism of the construction of its own inner time, and why our brain needs to construct our own inner time or space? Thank you very much.
Good question.
Do I need to translate in Chinese?
Yeah.
Okay, so that. 我请教，就是这一张投影片里面提到，我们建构内在时间的这个状况想请教他有关的机制，还有说我们人脑为什么需要去建构一个内在时空？谢谢。
Okay. Yeah. The traditional view is, and that's really prevalent in neuroscience, that time and space are just relevant for the brain in the perception and cognition of outer time and space. So the way I perceive you, now you moved your head a little bit. So I perceived a certain time, and that's outer time. That's a traditional behavioristic input-output view, and also still in cognitive neuroscience dominating. That's basically like an empty box, which just is determined by the external input and some cognitive facilities inside. That's cognitivism, behaviorism. That's the dominant view of the brain. However, it is clear that the brain itself had its own inner dynamic. So I don't have those slides now. I often show, so imagine that you go to the parking spot and your car stands still, just as usual. Yeah? So, and that's basically the way they perceive the brain and treat the brain in current neuroscience. So it's only outer time and space. However, imagine you're going there and you see your car spontaneously moving back and forth in certain trajectories and certain speed without a driver. Yeah? Yeah? It's not yet a self-driving car. It's an intrinsic feature of the car of exhibiting this intrinsic dynamic and moving. That's what the brain is. Why? Because the brain itself exhibits a spontaneous activity which is completely independent of any external input. The external input is just modulates the activity a little bit. And the degree to which it modulates determines whether you perceive more the external contents or the internal contents in your consciousness. But even in the spontaneous activity itself, you still have consciousness. Dreams, silent meditation, solitude, what you showed me yesterday. Yeah, your founder. You still have consciousness. This is very important. So that's the empirical phenomenological side of things. The conceptual side of things goes back to one of my main philosophers is Immanuel Kant in the German tradition, who opens the critique of pure reason, with one of his major works, with the transcendental aesthetics, where he speaks of inner and outer time consciousness. So, and that's exactly that model, that Kantian model, I apply to the brain. And say, put it to rigorous empirical testing and say, wow, Kant was right. Yeah, so you have an inner and outer time. So that's a conceptual approach. But of course, in your meditation, your deep meditation experience, this inner and outer time align and match with each other. So that you don't have this duality of time. So if you want to say so, and let's say if I take an ontological perspective, the distinction between inner and outer time is nuisance. Yeah, because the inner time of the brain is part of the time of the world, / there cannot be two different times existing. Yeah. So consider the distinction between inner and outer time, not an ontological distinction, because that is completely nuts if I were doing that. But it's an epistemological, methodological distinction, which helps me to understand what's going on and to conduct experimental studies. And that would be very much in accordance with your deeper layers of meditation. You go beyond your own cognition and the knowledge back to the very ontological basis in which and through which we exist.
对啊，所以简单的说，就是内在跟外在的这种认知，或者是内在外在的这种时间啊，那对他来讲就是蛮重要的。那刚刚他说从康德那边他拿到这个理论的灵感啊，就是认为我们有内在的时间跟外在时间这不一样啊。那所以刚刚就讲这个时间是内在于事物的变化啊，所以脑它有脑波变化啊，那所以脑会产生内在的时间啊，那世界自己的变化会产生它自己的时间啊，那两个就是在正常人会有一定的程度的 alignment 啊，那更高端的静坐者的 alignment 程度更高啊，所以更高到一个状况，他的那种自我的消融感可能就会产生这种跟正常人不一样的变化啊等等。王华你要补充对不对？
刚才提到这个问题，需要。So I'm just repeat the second question, which it might be helpful if you answer more. Which is that why is it that the brain itself needs a spatial temporal structure? So when Professor Chen was explaining, his idea is that, well, because there is change happening in the brain, so there is a spatial temporal structure. But I think maybe I forgot your name. Hui Ming Fa Shi, his question is, why does it need it? Is there a reason why there should be a spatial temporal structure? Yeah.
I mean, you can answer that question in different ways, ontologically or let's say evolutionary. I mean, I would say, see, organs, they, in a very difficult, almost paradoxical situation. On the one hand, they need to distinguish themselves from their respective contexts in order to exist and continues to exist. So you need to mark boundaries. And on the other hand, you need to be in continuous exchange with the environment because that basically feeds you. So Claude Bernard, a French physiologist, spoke of a milieu intérieur, end of 19th century. And I think that's exactly what you have here. So you have a milieu intérieur that needs to be kept stable and distinct from the respective environmental context. So how is that possible? You create a spatial temporal structure which is not identical to the one of your environmental context. And so you distinguish yourselves. There are certain differences. Yeah, there are differences in time scales. The world has a much wider array of time scales than us. Dogs have a different time scales than us, but partially overlapping. Yeah, so you see here the notion of time scales is absolutely, for me, key here. And that's, I think, that evolutionary then leads, you have your own time scales, a certain temporal structure. And however, that temporal structure, the temporal range, is just one part of the whole temporal range of the time scales of the environment. Yeah. So I usually like to, I don't have it when I give Zoom talks, you know, since COVID, you have to give a lot of Zoom talks. So I usually like to show, we have in our home, you probably already know this, windows of different sizes. Yeah. And the time scales of the brain are basically like different window sizes, zoom in, zoom out, through which you see the environmental context. Yeah. And I think that distinguishes the brain from its context, but at the same time, it links it in a virtual way. And that's your mental features. Yeah. I hope that, and I'm not versed enough in evolution. So I am very interested in evolution of time scales, but there's nothing around. Yeah.
好，
你就直接
OK， 所以刚才的问题是为什么脑会需要一个时空结构？那其实一个想法是，因为脑还是有别于世界，它的存在是有别于世界，而它让它自己有别于世界。那所以它的那个时空结构没有办法完全跟世界一样，那就无分别了这样。那当然我们可能最后是希望无分别，可是现在的状况并不是无分别的。那所以脑有别于世界的一个可以理解的方式就是脑透过自己的时空结构去看世界。那这也就是可是当然脑在需要去看世界的时候，它其实已经在世界之中，所以它要能够看到世界，它一定是有一个世界与脑的关系就是这个脑必须要在某种程度下已经跟这个世界有一个连通关系，就是这个 alignment， 你才能够有意识，才能够看得到世界。可是它又不是完全跟世界已经重合了这样所以那这个也许可以从演化的方式来解释，只是说演化在这个时空结构的这个面向没有什么讨论。对，那所以这是一个简短的帮忙翻译这样谢谢。
Sorry about it. Okay. Why I ask this kind of question? Because I hear a saying about this reason. It's talking about our visual information recognition in our brain only can catch maybe need to contract time because the visual only the space and the hearing only the time, have no space. So in order to mix our visual information and hearing, the audio information, we need to contract the time and space to merge two kind of the information. Otherwise, we cannot utilize two kind of information. What do you think about this kind of saying? Thank you. 我请教就是说，因为我听过有这样子的说法，就是说，为什么需要脑的内在时空？主要是视觉，它其实只有空间而已，因为你看到的就是当下一个空间。我们要把它串起来才变成电影嘛，要跑这个，所以我们要创造一个时间。 可是听觉正好相反，它只是时间这样子，这个刹那这样过去，所以要把视觉跟听觉把它 merge 起来，要把它创造起来，我们就需要有一个内在时空了。我也听过这样一个说法，所以想请教那个教授他的想法是这样，谢谢。
Yeah, very good question indeed. In our experience, we experience time and space also as convergent. Yeah, it's not as integral. And I don't think that the two different systems in the brain, one for time and space. So the way, but of course the visual is more spatial than dynamic, and the auditory is more dynamic than spatial, but not exclusively so. That's very important. But you're right indeed, while you were talking about this, there's sort of a gradient in the brain. I didn't show this. There's a hierarchy within the brain itself, a topography, that you have sort of more unimodal, simple sensory regions, like visual cortex, auditory cortex, and so forth. And then you have sort of higher order, more associative or transmodal regions where they really converge. Yeah. And that indeed, I think, and interestingly, this gradient, we work a lot with that. From unimodal to transmodal regions is also a gradient in time scales. Shorter time scale for the sensory, more precise. Longer time scales for the higher order regions, meaning where you put things together and things become blurred. Yeah. So that indeed, and that can be found quite robustly, and that also impacts your perception. You have more local perception in the sensory regions, more global perception with the other. And for instance, I could imagine that in me, that is something I would love to investigate in meditative if I get the right fMRI data sets, that this unimodal transmodal hierarchy is sort of flattened. That it's no longer as different, the transmodal from the unimodal. Because meaning your brain does not add as much to the external input in the proficient meditative stage. That's why you basically perceive the external inputs in a more original or native way. Your brain doesn't add as much because of this reorganization of the brain. Yeah? And I think that perceptually is a hypothesis that is related to what I heard from several people. You have a more fine-grained and detailed perception. You perceive the details much more as a proficient meditator than in beginning meditator. Yeah. So here you see can direct make linkages. Topography dynamic to the perceptual side.
好，还有时间吗？
有时间。
翻译一下，好，那就是我们平常感受到的是整合起来的感受，但是的确似乎听觉比较是感受到那个动态性，然后如果是视觉感受到比较是空间性，虽然这都不是绝对的，因为好，那现在就是很有趣的，就是大脑的里面的确有一些区是视觉区、听觉区，这个是有功能分配的部分，但是也有连结不同区域而超越单一功能的这个区块，是处理这个融合的部分。那所以然后很有趣的是，这些单一功能的区块，它的 time scale 要怎么翻译？那对，其实您都不用翻译的，对，它的时间尺度是比较小的，而这个融合的区块trans 的这个部分呢，它是时间尺度是比较长的，所以它接下来一个很有兴趣想要研究的，就是也许对于这些你们这个修行这个道行很高的这些你们的这个大脑的结构可能会改变，以至于使得这个跨的区块和这个单一功能的这个脑的区块的时间尺度其实会变成比较统一那也许会有这个差别，那所以希望这方面有多一点研究，这样好，谢谢。
Thank you for the talk. I do like the term alignment and synchronization. But I might be wrong in learning that you seem to apply one kind of alignment or synchronization is better than the other kinds. For example, the experienced meditator may have a better synchronization than like naive meditators. However, I'm wondering what kind of criterion are you using, or are we using to judge which kind of alignment is better? Because like for some research might indicate that depressed people are more accurate in kind of estimating the objective probability in a game theory, in a game kind of situation. So in that case, they have a better alignment. But how do we judge which kind is better? And do you actually have that kind of implication?
Yeah, so very, very important here. Very good point what you say. What you say, the accuracy in a cognitive task. Yeah, that's what you describe.
That might be my misunderstanding.
Yeah, but that's very important. Let me go now. I think it's slide number 26. I have to see. Yeah, yeah. Since you know the number of slides so well, let me go with this one. This one. So this is a very important thing. So what you measure with, because it goes right into the heart, the kind of stuff you're currently doing. So the accuracy is up here. Yeah? You isolate. So in your cognitive paradigms, okay, I really go into detail now, I have to. In your cognitive paradigms, the way you do, you have plenty of trials, 100 trials of the same task. Yeah? And that has a certain temporal structure, a certain what you call intertrial interval. Now you, let me just give you that stamp, as a cognitive guy, you will not be interested in the intertrial interval, because you're just interested in the accuracy, how much I hit the right button for the object. You abstract in your data analysis from the intertrial interval and the overall temporal structure of the paradigm. So in a way, what you're doing is static psychology, which is fair. You operate, I'm too small, up here. That's where you are. And methodologically, you completely abstracted from the brain dynamic and the temporal structure of the task. And now, that's the first thing. So in your methodology, how you analyze the data and what you chase accuracy, you abstract from it. You take it out because you average across trials, disregarding the temporal structure. Now, I say, yes, that is a deeper background, that this temporal structure might explain some of the not 100% accuracy. Yeah? Meaning the misses. Because depending upon how the temporal structure of the task is relative to the temporal structure of your brain's spontaneous activity, you can match. Yeah? And that degree of mismatch, and we have a study in preparation on that, predicts your misses. So I'm much less interested in the accuracy, but I'm much more interested in the misses. Where do they come from? That's where I said it's a deeper layer. Now in depression, you have exactly a mismatch. So basically that isolates the single object better, so you might have a higher accuracy. But they do not perceive it, perception experience, in the context. Yeah? So you artificially, basically you shift to make things simple, much more simple. You operate on different time scales. Here, you operate on a very short time scales related to your single trial. You don't care about the time series of trials. I know this is very difficult to translate. And here you operate on a much longer time scale. And what I'm saying that the relationship between this time scale, the longer and the shorter, that should predict your accuracy and misses. And that's exactly what we see in our field. So your cognition has a temporal dynamic envelope. Yeah, it's basically like a fast Fourier transformation you put it on. Yeah, and if you're right, my dynamic should predict your cognitive parameters. That's exactly what we're currently doing, and the data support them. Yeah, it's a deeper layer. Remember the iceberg? There's no iceberg here. The iceberg stuff. Yeah, I'm beneath the water. That's why I'm always suffocating, and you are above. I'm sorry.
我的问题是说，虽然这个同步到底是什么意思？因为有时候有一些研究指出，忧郁症的人在估计外在的几率是比正常人，所谓正常人是更准确一点。那我们用什么标准来判断什么是好的同步，或者什么是好的 alignment 这样子？那不过刚刚他指出来的就是说，当我们去看一个资料的时候，其实有不同面向的观看。所谓的 accuracy， 也就是正确率，只是一个综合的一个结果。可是我们如果去看在整个实验判断的这个过程，它的一些时间跟动态的这些知觉以及这些变动的时候，比这个去把这些所有东西都让在一起，只算最后的 accuracy， 可能更能够看到一个丰富的面貌。而我们在看这些时间空间的，特别是忧郁症病人在这个时候的他的一些动态的状况，我们也许也能够从这个更能够预测他为什么会出错，而提供更丰富的了解。这是我刚刚觉得听到的一个学习。不用。
I'm for this session, wonderful session and dialogues, and I'm sure there will be more dialogues and questions. We have in the end of this stage, we have a round table, so there we can entertain more questions. So thank you again, Professor Nordhoff and 郑老师，还有各位大家